Some rooms don't reveal the truth until someone powerful forgets who's watching. The federal courtroom in downtown Baltimore had the kind of silence that made every small sound feel expensive. The soft shuffle of legal pads, the low hum of fluorescent lights, the dry turn of a page beneath a judge's hand. Congresswoman Monica Hayes stood at the petitioner's table in a navy suit that fit like discipline, one palm resting on a stack of documents thick enough to change careers, maybe even end them. She had come prepared for resistance, for condescension, for the polished kind of disrespect that never needed to raise its voice. What she had not prepared for was the exact moment the room changed, when Officer Grant Mercer, broad-shouldered in uniform and too comfortable under the seal of the court, stepped out of line and made the kind of move that told everyone exactly who he believed deserved dignity and who did not. The reaction was instant but strangely incomplete, like the whole room inhaled and forgot how to finish. A court reporter froze with her fingers above the keys. Someone in the gallery whispered, then stopped mid-breath. The bailiff shifted 1 foot across the marble floor, then didn't move again. Monica felt the sting of humiliation far more than the contact itself, not because it hurt, but because it arrived wrapped in something older than anger, something colder than pride. It was the public assumption that a black woman could be handled, dismissed, reduced, even here, even now, even beneath the carved wood and solemn language of American law. A red pulse rose along her cheek, but her face stayed composed. That was the first thing people would remember later, not Mercer's expression, not the muffled gasp from the back row, but Monica Hayes refusing to crumble in a room that had almost expected her to. She bent slowly, gathered the top page that had slipped sideways, straightened the edge against the table, and lifted her eyes to meet his. Mercer looked certain in the way weak men often do when authority has protected them too long. He stood there with the rigid confidence of someone who thought a badge could edit reality in real time. Monica studied him for 1 measured second, then another, and the air between them tightened. Her voice, when it came, was low, steady, and somehow louder than the room had been all morning. Now they see you. The words landed harder because she did not rush them. Across the aisle, her attorney turned, surprise flickering into something sharper, as if a strategy he had hoped to unveil later had just become urgent. Up near the bench, the judge leaned forward. In the second row, a local reporter quietly hit record again. And Officer Grant Mercer, who had spent years counting on chaos to protect him, did not yet realize that the most dangerous thing in that courtroom was no longer his temper, but Monica's calm, the evidence under her hand, and the sealed backup drive sitting less than 3 feet away, waiting for the court to ask one simple question no one had asked yet. What did the missing body cam footage show? Monica Hayes had learned a long time ago that some people only respected composure when it came wrapped in power, and even then, only if that power looked familiar to them. She had grown up 10 miles from the harbor in a narrow brick row house where the radiator clanged all winter and the kitchen window rattled every time a city bus passed. Her mother taught 4th grade in a public school where half the books were older than the students, and her father worked maintenance at the courthouse for 23 years, polishing floors that powerful people crossed without ever looking down. Monica used to wait for him on Fridays in the lobby, legs swinging from a hard wooden bench, watching attorneys in dark suits walk by with leather briefcases and the quiet certainty that the building belonged to them. Her father would hand her a paper cup of hot chocolate from the vending machine and tell her the same thing every single time. Learn the room. Learn the rules. Then learn who thinks the rules do not apply to them. She had carried those words further than anyone in that old neighborhood had imagined. Debate team. Scholarship. Howard. Law degree. State Senate. Then Congress. Every step came with a smile somebody did not mean, a compliment with a hook inside it, a meeting where she was mistaken for staff until she started speaking. Monica never forgot the pattern. The insult changed clothes, but it rarely changed intent. That was why she was standing in this courtroom now, not only as a lawmaker, but as the woman who had refused to let one missing recording, one altered timeline, and one protected officer slide quietly into the archive of things this country asked black families to survive and then forget. The hearing had started 2 hours earlier with polished language and procedural restraint. Officer Grant Mercer had entered the room wearing confidence like custom tailoring. His answers had been clipped, professional, carefully filed down at the edges. He addressed the court with respect, the cameras with caution, and Monica with a kind of irritation that tried to pass for patience. But she had noticed the shift the moment her counsel placed the incident log beside the dispatch transcript. Mercer stopped blinking as often. His jaw set. One finger tapped the witness rail twice, then twice again. When Monica requested permission to reference the maintenance corridor camera and the timestamp that no longer matched his written statement, the atmosphere changed so fast it almost had a sound. Not loud, not dramatic, just a pressure change, like a summer storm pressing against old glass. Mercer had looked at her then not as a congresswoman, not as counsel to the petitioner, not even as a public official. He looked at her as an interruption, as a woman who had stepped out of the place he had assigned her in his mind. And that was always the dangerous moment, the moment when truth felt personal to someone who had built a career on never being questioned. Monica knew that look. She had seen versions of it in committee rooms, donor dinners, and television green rooms where men congratulated her eloquence because they had expected obedience. But this was different. Here, under oath, with the seal of the court overhead and the record running, Grant Mercer had forgotten the oldest lesson in public life. Arrogance is never more exposed than when it thinks it is protected. Monica kept one hand on the file in front of her, feeling the edge of the seal drive beneath the papers, and let the silence settle until it belonged to her. Grant Mercer had spent so many years being believed on sight that he had started to confuse trust with proof. In Baltimore police circles, he was the kind of officer supervisors liked to place near cameras after a scandal: tall, pressed uniform, controlled voice, a face that looked steady enough for evening news sound bites. He knew how to stand with his hands folded just below the belt, how to lower his chin at the right moment, how to answer a direct question with just enough detail to sound honest without ever giving away the part that mattered. To men above him, he was dependable. To reporters who only needed a clean quote before deadline, he was useful. To city officials who preferred the appearance of order over the discomfort of truth, he was familiar, which in institutions like this often meant safe. But Monica Hayes had read enough files to know that safety was often just reputation with better lighting. Mercer had a record that looked spotless until someone held it at the right angle. Civilian complaints that went nowhere. Reports filed with matching language across unrelated incidents. Missing minutes in chain of custody logs. Body camera interruptions explained by technical failure at the exact moments when testimony later became convenient. Nothing dramatic on paper. Nothing one line at a time. But patterns rarely announced themselves with fireworks. Patterns lived in repetition, in the quiet confidence of a person who had never once expected to be the one under scrutiny. That was what made Mercer dangerous. Not temper, not size. Certainty. He had the kind of certainty that comes from moving through America with every institutional reflex already leaning in your direction. White, male, uniformed, practiced, he did not need to raise his voice to claim the center of a room. Rooms bent for him anyway. Even now, with the hearing tilting away from his control, a part of him still seemed convinced that the system would gather around him before it gathered around the facts. The polished oak, the brass fixtures, the county seal behind the bench, all of it looked less like accountability to him than home field advantage. He glanced toward the gallery once, then toward the judge, measuring where sympathy still might live. Monica saw it happen in real time. That old calculation: who will protect me? Who will doubt her? Who will call this misunderstanding instead of misconduct? It was there in the set of his mouth and the rigid line of his shoulders. He was not just defending a statement anymore. He was defending the version of the world that had always told him he would be handled gently. The federal courtroom had become uncomfortably warm under the overhead lights, and still Mercer kept reaching for poise as if poise alone could outvote evidence. A bead of perspiration gathered near his temple before he wiped it away. His attorney leaned in with a whisper, but Mercer barely turned. Men like him were often least prepared for the moment they stopped being the narrator of the room. Monica understood that too. She had watched powerful people unravel not when they were accused, but when they were accurately seen. The record before her was no longer just a stack of pages. It was a mirror, and Grant Mercer was beginning to realize that once the court looked into it, the image staring back would not be the one he had spent his career rehearsing. Monica did not move right away. That was what unsettled the room most. Not noise, not panic, but restraint so complete it felt like control made visible. The overhead lights cast a pale sheen across the varnished counsel tables, across the polished brass rail, across the stack of exhibits waiting in front of her like patient witnesses. Somewhere near the back row, the air conditioning clicked on with a low mechanical hum, and the sound seemed unusually loud because no one else was speaking. Officer Grant Mercer remained fixed where he stood, shoulders squared, jaw tight, still carrying himself as though posture alone could restore what had just shifted. But the balance of the courtroom had changed. It was there in the way the judge leaned forward instead of back, in the way the court reporter adjusted her machine and began typing again with renewed speed, in the way even the gallery no longer looked at Mercer with automatic trust. Monica placed one hand lightly on the edge of the table and turned a single page in her file. The paper made a dry, clean sound, deliberate, measured, almost gentle. Then she looked up and addressed the bench, not Mercer, because she understood something he still did not. In rooms built on procedure, the person who keeps their discipline usually wins the frame. "Your Honor," she said, her voice calm enough to cool the temperature of the room. "I would like the record to reflect that the witness has already answered one question with a statement the timeline cannot support." The words did not land like a shout. They landed like a key turning. Mercer's attorney straightened. "Objection," he said quickly, but there was hesitation in it now, a thin hairline fracture running through his confidence. Monica did not interrupt. She waited. The judge asked for the basis. That was all she needed. She slid the dispatch transcript forward by exactly 3 inches, then placed beside it the building access log, then the printed summary from internal review. 3 documents. 3 times. 3 separate records that should have aligned if Mercer had told the truth. They did not. The mismatch was small enough to escape a careless eye and devastating enough to matter once seen. Mercer had claimed he was in the West Corridor at 8:14 that morning. The dispatch record placed his call sign elsewhere. The maintenance log showed the security door never opened. And the internal summary, signed 2 weeks later, repeated his version as if repetition could manufacture reality. Monica did not raise her voice. She did not need to. 1 clock can drift, she said. 2 records can be corrected. 3 independent inconsistencies begin to look less like error and more like design. A murmur moved through the gallery before the bailiff called for order. Mercer finally turned toward her fully, and the expression on his face was no longer irritation. It was recognition, sharp and unwelcome. He was beginning to understand that she had not come to embarrass him. She had come prepared to dismantle the story, protecting him piece by piece, in public, under oath, where every word could harden into consequence. Monica could feel the sealed backup drive beneath the folder near her wrist, cool and small and heavier in meaning than in weight. She had not introduced it yet, not because she was uncertain, but because timing mattered. Let the room see the cracks in the wall before showing them what had been hidden behind it. The judge asked Mercer whether he wished to amend his prior statement. For the first time all morning, he did not answer immediately. And in that hesitation, brief as it was, the courtroom heard something far more dangerous than anger. It heard a man realizing that the version of events he had counted on was starting to slip beyond his control. Grant Mercer opened his mouth as if authority could still arrive in time to save him. But what came out first was silence, the kind that settles over a room. When a man realizes the script he trusted no longer fits the evidence in front of him. The judge waited. The court reporter kept typing. Somewhere in the gallery, a chair gave a soft creak and then went still again. Monica Hayes could feel every eye in the courtroom shifting, not wildly, not dramatically, but with the slow, unmistakable turn of people beginning to understand they had not been watching a routine hearing at all. They had been watching a wall crack from the inside. Mercer finally adjusted his collar and said he would be happy to clarify the timeline. It was a careful answer, polished on the surface, but Monica heard the strain beneath it. Clarify was the word people used when correction sounded too much like confession. Her attorney remained seated, one hand resting beside the sealed backup drive, letting Monica control the rhythm because this part mattered. Not the documents alone. The pressure. The space between question and answer. The moment when a person used to command begins to discover what it feels like to stand inside doubt. Then clarify this, Monica said, lifting the dispatch transcript with steady fingers. At 8:14 in the morning, your report places you in the West Corridor. At the same minute, Dispatch logs your unit responding from the East Service entrance. The maintenance access file shows that West Corridor door never opened. Which record would you like this court to disregard first? A few people in the gallery lowered their eyes to their laps, not out of boredom, but because the question landed with that particular legal sharpness that left no clean place to hide. Mercer turned toward the bench instead of toward her, another mistake. It made him look like a man asking the room to rescue him from the facts. His attorney rose halfway, then stopped, reading the judge's face and sitting back down with the reluctant understanding that interruption might only worsen the damage. The overhead lights washed everything in the same pale brightness, but the emotional temperature had changed. Monica could feel it in her own breathing, slow and controlled, and in the dryness at the back of her throat that came not from fear, but from focus. She thought briefly of her father's hands, rough from years of maintenance work, straightening courthouse flags before dawn while men with titles slept at home assuming order took care of itself. Learn the room. Learn the rules. Then learn who thinks the rules do not apply to them. Grant Mercer was not sweating because of one question. He was sweating because the room had stopped working the way it always had for him. Monica set the transcript down and placed her palm over the closed folder that concealed the drive. She did not reveal it yet. Instead, she gave him something far more unsettling than accusation. A chance. Officer Mercer, she said, and her voice dropped so low the silence had to lean in to hear it. This is the moment when people decide who you are. Not when things are easy. Not when your uniform speaks for you. Right now. He looked at her then. Really looked at her, perhaps for the first time all morning, and what he saw was not outrage, not chaos, not someone he could dismiss as emotional or reckless. He saw discipline. He saw memory. He saw a black woman standing in full command of a courtroom that had nearly failed her and refusing to surrender even 1 inch of her dignity to his panic. The judge asked again whether he wished to amend his statement. Mercer inhaled, held it, and glanced toward the folder near Monica's hand as though some part of him already knew the truth was sitting there in silence, waiting to be heard. The courtroom did not get louder after that. It got quieter, and somehow that carried more force. Outside the tall windows, late afternoon light had begun to flatten into a pale gold wash over the city, the kind of light that made glass look softer than steel and turned dust in the air into something almost visible. Inside, nothing moved quickly anymore. Even the ceiling vents seemed to breathe slower. Monica Hayes stood with one hand resting on the folder in front of her and the other hanging loose at her side, her posture straight, her face composed, her pulse finally settling into a rhythm she could trust. She had spent enough years in public life to know that the most important moments were rarely the loudest ones. They were the suspended moments, the ones where people had to sit with what they had just seen and decide whether they would keep protecting comfort or make room for truth. Officer Grant Mercer remained at the witness stand, but the uniform no longer carried the same weight it had an hour earlier. The brass buttons still caught the overhead lights. The dark fabric still held its shape. Yet something had changed in the way the room received him. Authority, Monica thought, was often nothing more than collective belief with better tailoring. Once that belief cracked, everything underneath became visible at once. She could see it happening to him in real time. His shoulders were still squared, but the confidence inside them had thinned. His eyes kept drifting, not only toward the judge, not only toward his attorney, but toward the folder near her hand, as if he could feel the presence of what had not yet been played. He was no longer controlling the silence. He was trapped inside it. Monica lowered her gaze for one brief second and noticed the faint impression her fingertips had left on the edge of the paper. A small detail. Almost nothing. But in rooms like this, she had learned to trust small details. The tremor in a voice that claimed certainty. The extra second before an answer. The missing notation on a chain of custody form. Truth rarely burst through the wall all at once. It seeped through the seams first. Her attorney leaned closer and asked in a whisper whether she wanted to move for the video immediately. Monica did not answer right away. She watched the judge instead. Watched the gallery. Watched the court reporter remove her glasses and wipe them with a folded tissue, then put them back on as if she sensed the next few minutes would matter. In the third row, a reporter from the local station had stopped looking at her phone and was staring forward with both hands around a notepad. Near the aisle, An older woman who had been sitting with the petitioner's family since morning pressed her hands together and exhaled slowly, the kind of exhale that sounded like years leaving a body. Monica understood that too. This hearing had never been only about one officer, one statement, one insult under fluorescent lights. It was about how many times communities like hers had been told that the missing piece did not matter, that the tape was unavailable, that the discrepancy was clerical, that the witness was credible because the system had already decided he would be. She thought of the families who never got this room, never got this transcript, never got a judge willing to ask the follow-up question. She thought of her father walking courthouse halls before sunrise with a ring of keys at his belt, tending to a building that would have once treated his daughter as background. Learn the room. Learn the rules. Then learn who thinks the rules do not apply to them. The words returned now not as memory, but as structure, something solid under her feet. When she finally lifted the folder, she did it without drama. The latch opened with a soft click. Inside sat the backup drive, small, black, almost ordinary, the kind of object a person could overlook unless they understood what lives inside ordinary things. A vote, a record, a name on a line, a camera that had kept watching when someone hoped it had not. Monica looked up at the bench and let the stillness stretch one final second. Then she spoke with the same calm that had carried her this far. "Your Honor," she said, "before this court decides whether to trust memory, I believe it should hear what the record preserved." The judge gave a single nod, and the courtroom clerk stepped forward to receive the drive with both hands, as carefully as if it were evidence and verdict at the same time. No one spoke while she crossed to the monitor station beside the bench. The only sounds were mechanical and small, the soft click of plastic against metal, the hum of the screen waking up, the faint rustle of paper as people in the gallery straightened without realizing they were doing it. Monica Hayes did not sit. She remained standing at counsel table, shoulders level, one hand resting lightly on the closed folder, her eyes fixed on the dark monitor as it flickered into color. Officer Grant Mercer shifted at the witness stand. It was subtle, just a tightening through the neck, a brief movement of the jaw, but in a room this quiet, even subtle things acquired weight. The first image that appeared was not dramatic. A corridor. Concrete walls painted a tired, institutional beige. Fluorescent light flattening every surface. A timestamp burning white in the lower corner. Then footsteps. Voices farther away. The camera angle was not perfect, but it was honest, and honesty has its own kind of brightness. Monica watched the screen the way surgeons watch vital signs, not for spectacle, but for confirmation. The recording showed the exact stretch of service hallway Mercer had sworn he never entered. It showed the locked west corridor door opening at 8:14 in the morning, the same minute his written statement said he was somewhere else. It showed him stepping through with another officer behind him, speaking in a voice too low for every word to carry, but clear enough for tone, impatient, dismissive, unguarded by the performance he had worn in court. Then the video moved further. A young maintenance worker, barely more than a kid, stood beside a rolling cart with a badge clipped to his shirt. Black, nervous, hands visible, no threat in his posture, only confusion and the instinct to explain himself to men who had already decided explanation was not the point. The timestamp advanced. Mercer reached for the man's key ring, then looked directly toward the body camera, as if remembering too late that memory can be manufactured, but footage cannot. The audio sharpened just enough for the courtroom to hear the sentence that changed the temperature of everything. "No one is going to believe him over me." The words were not shouted. They were worse than that. Casual, certain, practiced. The kind of sentence a person only says when he has said versions of it before. A collective breath moved through the gallery like wind through dry leaves. The reporter in the third row stopped writing altogether. The older woman near the aisle closed her eyes for 1 second, as if the truth hurt less when met on her own terms. Mercer's attorney reached for a legal pad, then stopped, pen hovering uselessly above a blank page. There are moments when strategy leaves a room all at once, and this was one of them. On the screen, the recording continued. It showed the missing minutes. It showed the interaction he had omitted from the report. It showed the second officer glancing away, not shocked, merely uncomfortable in the familiar way of someone who knows a line has been crossed but has spent too long working near lines to call it by its right name. It showed enough, more than enough. The judge leaned back slowly, not in relaxation, but in the measured posture of a person recalculating the entire hearing from the foundation up. Monica did not look at Mercer immediately. She looked first at the bench, then at the screen, then down at the file she had built page by page, night by night, one record at a time. Only then did she turn her head. Mercer was no longer staring at the judge or the gallery. He was staring at the monitor like a man watching his reflection appear in a window he had mistaken for a wall. And Monica understood in that instant that the courtroom had crossed a line no power could uncross. The question was no longer whether Grant Mercer had lied. The question was how many times the system had listened to that lie, recognized it, and called it order anyway. No one rushed to speak after the video ended. The monitor went dark with a soft click, but the sentence it had carried seemed to remain suspended in the room, hanging over the bench, the witness stand, the gallery, and the polished counsel tables like something heavier than sound. Monica Hayes stood very still, feeling the last echo of it settle into the wood and brass around her. She had heard lies before. She had heard polished denials, procedural excuses, carefully folded versions of the truth trimmed down until they fit neatly inside official paperwork. But there was something uniquely exposing about certainty caught on record. Not rage, not confusion, certainty. The certainty of a man who had believed the institution around him would do what it had always done, hold its shape around his version of events, and call that stability. Across the room, Officer Grant Mercer no longer looked like the center of anything. The uniform was the same. The posture was almost the same. Yet the spell had broken. He had the hollow stillness of someone discovering too late that the room had stopped translating his power into credibility. His attorney rose, then asked for a brief recess. But even that request sounded smaller than it should have, as if language itself had lost some of its polish under the weight of the footage. The judge did not answer immediately. Instead, he removed his glasses, folded them in one hand, and looked down at the witness stand with the grave patience of a man who understood that some hearings stop being procedural the moment the record begins telling a different moral story than the one presented under oath. In the gallery, people were no longer shifting in their seats with ordinary courtroom restlessness. They were sitting in the kind of attention that comes when private knowledge becomes public confirmation. The older woman near the aisle pressed a hand to her mouth, not in surprise anymore, but in recognition. The young reporter in the third row finally lowered her pen and looked directly at Monica, not as a politician, not as a headline, but as the person who had forced this building to listen. Monica did not savor the moment. That was not why she had fought for it. Vindication, she had learned, rarely feels warm when it finally arrives. It feels quiet, clean, exhausting. She thought of the maintenance worker in the footage, of the fear in his posture, of the ordinary uniform he wore, of the key ring in his hand, of how many people like him had entered rooms already reduced by someone else's assumptions. She thought of all the hearings that never reached this point, all the missing minutes that stayed missing, all the testimonies smoothed into paperwork because no one with enough standing had decided to challenge the shape of the official story. Grant Mercer cleared his throat and said he would like to correct parts of his prior statement. The sentence barely made it across the room. Monica turned toward him then, and what struck her was not remorse. It was collapse. Not dramatic collapse. Institutional collapse. The slow draining away of borrowed certainty. He was not apologizing to the young man in the footage. He was not apologizing to her. He was reacting to the fact that the architecture around him had changed. The judge finally spoke, his voice measured and low, ordering the corrected testimony to be entered into the record and directing counsel to prepare for referral of the footage and supporting exhibits to federal review. At those words, another shift moved through the room, deeper than surprise. Consequence had entered. Real consequence. Not outrage for cameras. Not a statement for the press. A path with signatures, dates, and authority attached to it. Monica lowered her eyes to the folder beneath her hand and let herself breathe once, slowly. She had not come for revenge. Revenge was easy to imagine and impossible to build anything on. What she had wanted was harder. She wanted the record to hold. She wanted truth to survive the room it entered. She wanted the young man in that hallway, and everyone who had ever been told their account mattered less than a badge and a calm voice, to know that somebody had finally forced the system to hear the whole sentence. When she looked up again, Grant Mercer was no longer facing the bench. He was staring down at his own hands, as if he had just discovered they could no longer carry the version of himself he had brought into court that morning. By the time the hearing adjourned, the light outside had faded from gold to the deep blue of early evening, and the courthouse windows held the city like a reflection that had finally stopped trembling. People rose slowly, as if the room itself had become heavier than when they entered it that morning. Papers were gathered. Chairs eased back. Quiet conversations began in cautious undertones, but none of them reached Monica Hayes with any real force. She remained at counsel table for one last second, fingertips resting on the folder that had carried the truth into the record, feeling the smooth grain of the wood beneath her hand and the cooling air brushing across her face. The sting on her cheek had faded into warmth, then into memory, and now even that memory seemed less important than the silence that followed it. Not empty silence. Earned silence. The kind that comes when a room has finally been forced to witness what it once would have hurried past. Her attorney touched her elbow lightly and asked whether she was ready to go. Monica gave a small nod, closed the folder, and gathered the papers into a clean stack, pressing one bent corner flat with the side of her thumb. Across the room, Grant Mercer was still seated near the witness stand, shoulders lowered now, eyes fixed somewhere below the surface of the floor as federal marshals and court officers moved around him with procedural calm. No one was yelling. No one needed to. Consequence no longer required volume. It had already taken form in the record, in the referral order, in the footage now preserved beyond revision. Monica looked at him only once. Not with triumph. Not with pity. Simply with the steadiness of someone who understood that accountability was not cruelty, even when it arrived late. Especially. Then, she turned and began walking up the center aisle. The older woman from the gallery, the one who had sat with folded hands all afternoon, stepped aside and placed a palm over her heart. Monica answered with the smallest incline of her head. Near the doors, the young reporter lowered her notebook and let the moment pass without a question, as if some stories were better served by silence than interruption. Monica appreciated that more than she could say. Outside the courtroom, the hallway stretched long and polished under rows of recessed lights. The marble floor reflected her steps in soft flashes, dark heels, steady pace, navy suit, folder held close against her side. Halfway down the corridor, she passed the maintenance crew beginning the evening shift, one man rolling a yellow caution sign beside a cart of supplies, another checking a list clipped to a board. For a moment Monica saw her father in that image so clearly it caught at her breath. The early hours, the ring of keys, the dignity of work no title could improve. Learn the room. Learn the rules. Then learn who thinks the rules do not apply to them. She carried those words with her all the way to the courthouse doors. When she stepped outside, the night air met her cool and clean, carrying the faint smell of rain on stone and traffic from 2 blocks over. Camera lights had already begun to gather near the front steps, but Monica did not hurry toward them. She paused beneath the tall columns and lifted her face to the darkening sky, drawing in one slow breath before the questions, before the headlines, before the country tried to decide what this day had meant. In that brief stillness, there was no bench, no badge, no performance left to survive. Only a woman standing upright in the evening air, the record behind her, the truth intact, and the quiet, unmistakable feeling that justice, when it finally arrives, does not always sound like applause. Sometimes it sounds like a door opening, and then the long, steady footsteps of someone walking through it without ever looking back.